はじめに、少し、ご説明します。今回は、アメリカの、米軍退役大佐、ダグラス・マクレガーさんの、インタビュー動画をご紹介します。すでに、ご覧になった方も、いらっしゃるとは思いますが、何しろ、日本語オンリーの、スノードロップです。マクレガーさんの動画は、もちろん、英語です。こんな私に、救いの手を差し伸べてくださった、アキッカさん。いえ、すみません。すべての人のために、翻訳してくださったのですが、動画使用を、心よく、了承してくださいました。また、マクレガーさんのコメントにも、動画をシェアすることを認める、と書かれていますので、今回の動画を作成しました。人間、住人と色、考え方、生まれ、育ち、すべて違います。現実の、ウクライナとロシアの争い、に関しても、様々な意見があります。現実の、アメリカ人の発言、もちろん、アメリカ人の中にも、賛成反対はありますが、ただただ、日本の、マスゴミが発する、間違いだらけの報道から、少し、目をそらしていただければ、幸いです。プーチンさんも、先日の演説で、ウクライナ人に罪はない、と言われています。世の中が、少しでも早く、光に向かって進めるよう、そして、理不尽な、人間への要求が、早くなくなりますよう、祈りつつ、長くなりましたが、説明とさせていただきます。では、ゆっくり、ご覧ください。
Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for Real America with Dan Ball tonight, folks. We greatly appreciate you trusting us with your time. As a reminder, the Real America team has traveled to our nation's capital. That's right, it is day 3 of Dan in the Swamp, covering CPAC 2023. But before we get to the biggest conservative gathering around, I want to turn to the war in Ukraine. A fresh package of direct U.S. military aid for Ukraine worth $400 million was approved earlier today. The boost takes the total in taxpayer dollars the Pentagon has officially now released to $32 billion of the over $113 billion already approved, with no end in sight. This was a major topic between Joe Biden and the German chancellor when they met at the White House this week, as both allies look to secure more weapons and more funding for Ukraine while working on a joint plan, they say, to stop any attempt of China doing the same to support Russia. That's the scary thing. U.S. officials tell the Associated Press that the Biden regime plans to send at least 8 more M60A1 vehicles that can launch bridges and allow troops to cross over rivers, along with more ammunition, more of our rockets for our mobile artillery system that we already sent last year. But here's the deal. Here's the big question for me. Will any of this make a difference? Will it actually stop Russia? I don't think so. So, as we send more and more aid and weapons and our cash, think about this. We also draw down our existing weapons stock, which puts America in a bad spot. Kind of like Biden draining our emergency oil reserves. On Thursday's broadcast of CNN's Situation Room, White House National Secretary Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications, pretty much a professional BS artist, John Kirby, discussed things like this. I want you to watch little John try to pull the old Potomac two-step around this reporter's question.
On F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine, Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut told me yesterday that the U.S. needs to be, quote, stingy and make sure that we have the resources to protect ourselves and our treaty allies. Is that how the White House also views this?
We have, with every single package that the president has approved, made sure that we consult with the Pentagon, and the Pentagon can reassure the entire interagency that our national security interests are not going to be compromised by the material we're giving to Ukraine. Now, it is true, we've been drawing down on stocks quite a bit. Those inventories have got to be continually replaced. The Pentagon is prioritizing that, as you might think.
So, was that an answer? Or, anyway, something else to consider. Both Russian and Ukrainian armies have burned through most of their best soldiers over the past year. Both sides now relying on conscripts. The problem is, Russia has far more troops than Ukraine, and even though they might be younger and experienced ones, they still have more, which poses a massive challenge for Ukraine. In November, the Pentagon estimated both sides have lost more than 100,000 troops each to death or injury since Russia invaded in February of 2022. Neither side has divulged their actual tallies of casualties. That's an estimation. But the math right now, it's unfortunately on Moscow's side. Russia's population also 4 times Ukraine's population. So, Americans, what are we supposed to believe? Are we supposed to believe Russia's winning, Ukraine's winning, no one's winning? What's happening? But the bigger question, what should the Biden regime do now, do next? Because as the last year has proven, currently it seems this regime has no clue how to handle this conflict. Earlier today, I sat down with retired Colonel Doug McGregor here in our DC studios for more insight into the war. Colonel, welcome. First and foremost, I am really excited about this face-to-face, finally. We've been doing this for a couple of years, but nice to meet you in the flesh here. Right. Let's get right to this, because there is no joking around when it comes to war. Obviously, you know that. You have sent young men and women into battle. It appears now that this regime, this administration, may be doing that soon. I mean, we're literally being called out by the president of Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky, that we will have to send our sons and daughters or else. He just said that a few days ago. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Zelensky is all but admitting publicly that Ukraine's position is hopeless. Ukraine is effectively lost. They've taken thousands and thousands of casualties. We think the number of dead is approaching 200,000. That's largely because of this tenacious defense of Bakhmut. And the Russians, of course, welcome this opportunity because they could apply all of their rockets, missiles, artillery fire against concentrations of Ukrainian infantry. And they've inflicted enormous casualties on them. And the place is still going to fall, which was always inevitable, but I'm afraid Zelensky would not listen to his generals who said, look, let's get out, set up a new defense and fight further. Now he's really in bad shape. He has very little in reserve. Equipment, very modest, but the problem is the best soldiers are dead. So he's now shoving boys, old men, women into the breach. It's not going to work. So what we can say is that Zelensky's telling everybody, I've lost, and if you're not going to come here and win the war for us, it's over.
Let me take a step back, because before our sons and daughters go, the big push has been for the F-16s, for the jets. I'll back up even further. This war broke out, what, a year and 2 weeks ago about.
Right.
And it was, we wouldn't send our best missile defense systems. We've done that. A few months ago it was, we wouldn't send tanks. We did that. What are you hearing here in our capital about the jets going? Because I've seen and heard some things since I've been here in a few days from members of Congress that there is a bipartisan push now to send the jets. But also, if you send jets, by the time you train them up, get them ready to even go with them, you're talking about a year down the road. So that would prolong the killing in Ukraine just to send these jets.
Well, 2 things. The people I talk to on the Hill that are obviously friendly to me are telling me the administration has no military strategy. What they have is a media strategy. The media strategy is to convince everyone every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that Ukraine can win, that Ukraine is close to victory, that the Russians are falling apart, the Russians are demoralized. Well, that's weakening now. There are very few people that buy that narrative any longer. Even the dumbest observer can see that the Ukrainians are taking terrible losses. Now, there's a second problem. That is that right now, all of the complex equipment, HIMARS, complex surveillance equipment, drones, these kinds of things, are operated by contractors. Well, the contractors are NATO military personnel who are not in uniform, who are operating as contractors. If you try to send F-16s over there, they're going to need American pilots or German pilots or French pilots or somebody else. They can't possibly do it. So this is the slow slide into war that many people have really worried about for a long time. And I think the administration is struggling now. Do we admit failure, or do we slide the rest of the way into direct confrontation with Russia?
you have heard the buildup. You're the one that told me about the article. You see someone like an NPR or public radio, television saying a little bit different than what you see and hear if we turn on CNN tonight, MSNBC, or the big three, ABC, NBC, CBS. They're saying that Ukraine's doing great. That America needs to help more. And then when you see something like that from more independent, which I was surprised when you sent it to us, I'm like, wait, what a minute, I have to look at this again. Obviously, people are getting the clue back here at home because, and I'd like you to tell my viewers, there's a big difference between what possibly the State Department is saying is actually happening in Ukraine and what Mr. Biden's regime is telling the press to say to the American people.
Yes, I think it's important that Americans understand that historically, public broadcasting, specifically National Public Radio, has been a good mouthpiece for the State Department. If you wanted to know what the thinking was at Foggy Bottom about anything, but particularly about foreign interventionism, which is really what they've been all about for 30 years, you turn to NPR, and they would praise wherever you went and whatever you were doing. Oh, we're intervening in Bosnia, intervening in Iraq, intervening in Kosovo. It's all good news. Well, what's interesting about this article is it's not good news. They're admitting that the weight of Russian manpower as well as military power in general is crushing Ukrainians. They're essentially telling the reader, this is not going to work. No amount of Ukrainian valor is going to stand up to the firepower. They're being pushed back. You've got to read between the lines a little bit, but that's essentially the message. The message is Ukraine can't win. Now, that's very, very important because, again, that's expressing a view that's probably held inside circles in the State Department. We also had a meeting yesterday between Mr. Blinken and Mr. Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister in our State Department.
They were at the G7 summit, one of the summits over there, right.
And this was supposed to be a meeting where Mr. Blinken was going to make it clear that we would stay the course and fight forever and so forth. Well, when they walked out, Lavrov walked out very briskly, and Mr. Lincoln sort of slinked out with his head down. I think Lavrov read the riot act to him, and I don't think our threats ring with much credibility. You know, he knows, the world knows, Americans are not going to support a war in eastern Ukraine. They're not going to support the movement of 1 million American soldiers to Europe to fight it. It's not going to happen. And it puts everything at risk, including the United States. The Biden administration knows if it does this, they're finished politically. So they're edging up to this abyss that they don't want to jump into, which is the abyss of we've got to come to an arrangement. We've got to settle this thing. But settling it means admitting certain things. Most important, that they misjudged the Russians. Remember, initially, I think it was Mr. Putin who misjudged us. He thought, well, I'll intervene, I'll use a small force, I'll make it clear that we're serious and Americans will listen to us, and then we'll have a negotiation. Wrong. We took the opposite position. We said, this is wonderful. He's walked into Ukraine with this little force. They're not very good. We can crush them. So we'll pour on all the equipment, assistance, and cash that we can. We'll hire all of the mercenaries. We'll send Polish soldiers by the thousands over there in Ukrainian uniform, and we'll win this. Well, we misjudged the Russians. The sanctions had no impact. The Russians said, no, this is as vital to us strategically as northern Mexico would be to us. We wouldn't tolerate this sort of thing in northern Mexico, threatening the United States. The Russians aren't going to tolerate it in eastern Ukraine. We completely miscalculated, and now we're sitting staring at a disaster. This force that we armed in Ukraine is destroyed. They're losing thousands of people, on average anywhere from 500 to 800 a day. That's roughly a battalion every day vanishes. This cannot go on. They are running out of ammunition. They have no more 155 millimeter artillery ammunition. The Russians have stockpiled artillery that will last them for 30 months. Rockets, missiles, drones, hard shell ammunition. They've now expanded their force. It's up over 750,000. They plan to go to 1.5 million. This is serious stuff as far as the Russians are concerned, and we haven't taken it seriously. We thought this was an opportunity to harm Russia. All we've done is weaken NATO, harmed our credibility in the world's eyes. And now we've got to admit we made a mistake and come to an agreement, because if we don't, What is to stop the Russians from crossing the Dnieper River, occupying Kiev, and marching all the way to the Polish border? Nothing.
Colonel, not much time left. I got one final one for you because you don't mince words. It's what I love about you. I wish you were back in there commanding some troops. So speaking of that, let's go to the SecDef. Because, you know, as a peon little E4 when I got out, I always loved looking up to colonels and generals that I was awe-inspiring when they would speak. And Mr. Lloyd Austin, our SecDef, just recently said something, and we got just less than a minute here. But he said his job, he believes, is defending our nation, taking care of the American people, and succeeding all through this through teamwork. He ended that quote by saying, "We've made great progress in all three areas under his command." Would you agree with that assessment?
Well, he's following the lead of his commander-in-chief. He's not going to admit the truth. The truth is the Defense Department is in ruins. Morale is in the gutter. He's divided the force tremendously along racial lines and cultural lines. He's tried to throw out anybody that espoused any kind of values associated, worst of all, with Christianity. So what are we dealing with? We're dealing with a series of lies and falsehoods. That's all he's got. There's no truth in it.
Colonel McGregor, as always, it is a pleasure to have you on the program, but a real treat to meet you face to face.
Good to meet you, Dan.
Welcome back anytime, as you know. Right. Thank you, sir, for the insight.
ここまでのご視聴、ありがとうございました。よろしければ登録ボタンと、いいね、をポチっていただけると、嬉しいにゃ。